In this session, we're going to be talking about the Psalms. In Protestant tradition, there are 150 Psalms, and for many of us who are familiar with the Psalms, they might appear to be a very eclectic kind of collection. So let's see if we can just put our hands around some things that will help us to access the Psalms, help us to have a greater experience of them, and just a way that we might be able to engage them in a fully rich way in our own experiences. One of the things that you probably notice about the Psalms is the very wide range of human emotion and human experience. There is everything from celebratory joy to the very pits of hell itself and everything in between. And there is not a single human emotion that actually is not expressed in some way in the Psalms, whether it is anything from hatred and jealousy and bitterness to pleasure and joy and celebration, thankfulness and gratitude. Every human emotion and every human experience finds its way in the Psalms somehow. So let me offer this to you as a way of approaching the Psalms. On any given psalm, you might bump into a particular stream of emotion. Let me offer to you that in the sweep of all of the various human emotions that appear in the Psalms, that ultimately, no matter what emotion or human experience is being particularly expressed in a particular psalm, when you take all of them, what you might realize is that the Psalms help us to come into worship. They are ways that we come into the presence of God. They help clarify, they help articulate, they help discern what life is all about. And the beauty of the Psalms, certainly one of the powerful beauties to me, is that regardless of the particular emotion or the particular experience that we might be having at any given time or even any given day, the Psalms help us get back to God. So, for example, people who feel disconnected, people who feel like they don't feel the presence of God, or their prayers aren't being answered, or that God is not just, or their life is falling apart, and all of the things that go with that happens to all of us throughout the course of life. There are psalms that speak to the depth of the emotions that go with that and with the human experience of all of those kinds of things. And those psalms guide us, and they prepare us, and they help us to come back to the very heart of who we are as human beings and why we were created. In other words, they bring us back to the connection of worship with God. So even during seasons or times or periods where there might be, for whatever reason, extreme anger in our life, there are psalms that identify with that pick up on that, and that guide us back into the presence of God where we worship. The Psalms, as the very word indicates or intimates, is that they are the songs of Israel. We come to them, and when we read them, oftentimes it is difficult for us to hear them in the context of a song, but it might be helpful in your experience of the Psalms as you come to them to at least realize that you are reading a song that was sung. There are no musical scores to any of the psalms that we have. And this might lead us to see that perhaps God's intention is that every generation supply their music to the psalms. Obviously, if we had the music of the time and the culture in which the Psalms were written, we probably would not connect with that particular kind or style or genre of music. However, the Psalms kind of invites every generation, invites every culture, invites people from all times to come to them and to express them by putting, in a sense, their own music to the Psalms. So as you come to them, think about the ways that these Psalms, through music, have the power, again, to bring us into the presence of God, to bring us from wherever we are or whoever we are into the place where we can worship God. Another thing to think about when you are reading the Psalms, and you encounter this quite very much throughout the Psalms, is that there's going to be a high use of things like metaphors and images and symbols. So it's good as you are encountering the Psalms and reading them to realize that, again, in our human experience of life and in whatever ways those experiences unfold and in the depth of those kinds of experiences that we have, especially times of brokenness on the one end or times of great joy and celebration on the other, and the sheer amount of emotion that we experience through life, oftentimes the way or the most appropriate or the best way to portray or to reveal what human experience is all about and what human emotion is all about is to do so in forms like metaphors and images and symbols. So as you're reading through the Psalms, you will be encountering a lot of these along the way. And keep in mind that they are intentionally there so that they can help us to more adequately, to more fully express and encounter our own humanity, and for us to more fully to be able to express our relationship to God, or our relationship to the community, or our relationship to the world, or perhaps even our relationship just to our own selves. So the beautiful way and the beautiful images that are so very pervasive throughout the Psalms will be wonderful guides to us and ways through which we will be able in more full ways to experience the meaning of the psalm and to allow the psalm to kind of be able to wash over us and to bring us into the presence of God. One of the great unique features of the Psalms is that they represent us speaking to God. They are written by a variety of individuals, and these individuals are speaking to God rather than the more traditional way that we think about most, if not all of the other books of the Bible, God speaking to us or God revealing to us. The Psalms have this distinct human nature about them in the sense that they arise from our heart and we lift them up to the presence of God. And in that sense, as we are reading through the Psalms, we are reading experiences of individuals, communities, where they are lifting up their voice to God, where they in fact are speaking to God, or they are responding to God, or they are pouring out their hearts before God. or they are just laying themselves, in a sense, laying their souls out before God, or they are questioning God, or whatever the situation may be. There is this unique distinctive about Psalms in which we realize that they, in a sense, they originate with us and they ascend up to God. And there's also a larger picture of this, perhaps, and that is that the Psalms help us to see a cycle of prayer. Although the Psalms originate with us, when we read, when we pray, when we experience the Psalms, there is a cycle of prayer that begins to happen. So in one sense, it's probably just a little unfair to say that the Psalms are only just words that start in the human heart and are expressed to God. They are words that are there because we are experiencing or encountering a certain thing about life or in life, and in the broader sense, that experience arises out of the sense that there is a God, obviously, to whom we are speaking, praying, singing. And when the Psalms kind of rise from our hearts, when they are lifted up to God, it is not God just categorizing them like we tend to do, and as a praise song or a lament song or whatever it might be. It is an experience in which God hears us, and the cycle of prayer is that He responds, and then we begin to discern and enter into His response. And so the Psalms actually, to be fair, have the larger picture of a beautiful cycle of prayer in which we lift our hearts up to God. God's heart hears that, responds to us, our hearts respond to us, and you can see that the Psalms have the beautiful capability or capacity of allowing us or inviting us to enter into this kind of constant, continual, ever widening, ever deepening kind of relationship with God. Also keep in mind that when you're reading the Psalms, since they are songs, they are to be read as units. Oftentimes when we approach the Bible, there is a high tendency and temptation for us, for the purposes of analyzing the Bible or interpreting the Bible or being able to have a chance to just stop at a particular place that might speak to us. We tend to dissect the Bible and to analyze its content. If there is a place anywhere in the Bible where the dissecting process, just for the sake of dissecting something, or the analytical kind of approach is not what is intended, it would certainly be the Psalms. The Psalms are units of expression, and as such, the most fruitful and productive way that we can experience and engage Psalms is not just simply by isolating or over-analyzing particular places in the Psalms, although that could certainly be helpful in our fuller understanding. The purpose of any of that would be to help put that in the broader context of seeing the Psalms and experiencing the Psalms as units. It would be very much like just us listening to a small part of a song, or listening to a particular part of a song that we just begin to overanalyze and dissect and miss the whole song. So when you're coming to the Psalms, keep in mind that the best way you can experience them is to realize that as songs, they are to be read, to be encountered, and to be experienced as units. So just read and experience the entire psalm rather than just isolating something that connects with you, or taking a verse or part of the psalm here and then clipping that with another part of the psalm later. In the 150 psalms that we have, again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, there's a sense in which there's no narrative thread that runs through them like a storyline per se. They are responses to the story of God's redemption in the context of humanity and what God is doing in the world, and how God is responding, and how all of that impacts us and how we respond to that. So when you go to the Psalms, it's not like reading a particular narrative that on this particular day something was started and this storyline just continues throughout until its culmination at the end. It does in many ways seem or feel to be eclectic, but just a couple things that perhaps might be helpful in your engagement of the Psalms would suggest to you that the first two Psalms, particularly Psalm number 1 and Psalm number 2, do serve something as a setup or kind of as a guide to the encounter of the rest of the Psalms. Although there's a sense in which there's a randomness perhaps about the feel of the Psalms, it is the case that the Psalms, when they were collected, they were not just randomly selected and placed in a particular order. Recognizing this about the Psalms might help us to experience in them. So, for example, in Psalm 1, it is very clear in that psalm that the psalmist is talking about two ways of life. The way of the righteous and the way of the unrighteous, and again, like we were just talking about, he uses beautiful symbols in images to talk about the way of the righteous and the way of the unrighteous. One is like a tree planted by a river. The other is like chaff which the wind blows, and this imagery of the two paths or the two ways of life help us to gain a perspective that as we go through the entire book of Psalms, or whatever particular psalm you might be encountering, that there is kind of undergirding all of this the two paths of life. So no matter what psalm you are in, Psalm 1 is kind of always under the surface of that, suggesting to you that there is the way of the righteous and there is the way of the unrighteous. The second psalm kind of reveals to us the role of the king in the covenant of God. Many refer to this particular psalm, for example, as a messianic psalm, and this psalm is a helpful reminder that the nation Israel, from where these psalms are coming, the nation of Israel is living in a covenant with God, a covenant that goes back many, many years, promises that were given to Abraham. And there's a sense in which the role of the king, or the role of a coming Messiah, is revealed in the context of these psalms. So the first two psalms might be helpful ways for us to kind of just set our sights for what will happen, or what we might experience, or help us to kind of be guided through other psalms. And then at the other end of the book itself, especially the latter several psalms, as you know, there is the constant refrain of praise the Lord. And in these psalms, we kind of get a culminating crescendo, just outburst of praise of what life looks like. And you could maybe draw this back to Psalm 1. What does the culmination of the life of the righteous look like? What about those who follow the ways of God? What about those whose hearts are set on God? And so from Psalm 1, at least for me, I make a connection to things like Psalm 150, in which we see what is the result of that life of righteousness. What is the result of those choices that have been made? What is the result of that kind of heart with God? And so the end is just a culmination, a fanfare, a finale of praise and joy and celebration and expression back to God of just unhindered praise for who God is and for what He has done. Also want to mention to you something that has been very helpful to me in my experience of the Psalms. Very well-known, respected Old Testament scholar was the one that I first encountered this, and when I saw this, it really helped shape and guide me through the Psalms. Think about the Psalms as doing these three things. Some of the Psalms orient us. They help us to remember who we are, who God is, where we are in the world, what our purpose is, what our role, what our function is, how we relate to God, how we relate to the world, how we relate to the community. And those kinds of Psalms orient us. The world is this way. God is this way. And the human-divine connection unfolds in this way. And in order to live in a way that is meaningful and productive and fulfilling, we live out life this particular way. So there are a number of Psalms that help frame life, that help us see where things are in the frame. This is the orientation. This is who, and this is where different parts are, and this is how it works. Then there are other Psalms that totally disorient us. And you know how this happens in life. Right when we have something managed, or right when we have a new insight, it seems like, or right when we've made progress in a certain way in life, or in our own spiritual life, or in our relationship with God, it just seems like there is always something that comes along and seeks to dislodge that in a way, and there is a sense of disorientation. Something happens and it throws us off our rhythm. It throws us into the throes of something that might be a new and different kind of experience. It might tilt our world. It might turn us upside down. We may have been blindsided. It may have questioned all of the things that we have always known, and it might really forge a way into our life, or to our heart, or to our walk with God, or to our experience in such a way that we feel like we are just being spun around, and there's a sense of disconnectedness. There's a sense that we have been dislodged, or there is disorientation. All of the things that guided us are now in question, and north is south, and up is down, and things are just being spun around. And there are Psalms that, as you read them, they express the sense of this disorientation with life. And then, thirdly, there are Psalms that, as we are experiencing the disorientation in life, there are Psalms that bring us to a new orientation. If I can use the analogy, something like a new heaven and earth. a relationship with God that is deepened, that is widened, that has broader horizons than it did before the disorientation. And so the new orientation leads us to another place in the relationship, in our faith, in our experience with God. Now, if you kind of put these together and keep in your mind that various psalms have the capability to orient us in different ways: orientation, disorientation, new orientation. Perhaps we can see the fuller impact of what happens as we are encountering and reading the Psalms. There's a sense of orientation. God is good, the world is good, things are moving along as they should. All of a sudden, there is disorientation. All of that is put into question. All of that just seems to be something that evaporates in no time. We are disconnected. We feel dislodged. We are not sure of the things that we used to be so sure of, perhaps. And then there is the new orientation. The beauty is that the new orientation brings us to a place. It's an orientation that is greater than the orientation or the place where we started. So you can see that there are psalms that affirm, here is our place in the world. Then there is a disorientation. But in the new orientation, God takes us to a place that is greater than the orientation from which we began. So you could probably see that the Psalms can be very transformative in the sense that as we experience them and we move through these different kinds of places in life, that God is always moving us through seasons of orientation. This is life, this is the way it should be. Disorientation. We didn't see this, we didn't expect this. We are confused, we are angry, we are frustrated, we're not sure. And then God leading us back to new orientation. And once that happens, we can see that God has taken us, He has walked with us. Psalm 23, He walks with us even in the valley of the shadow of death. He triumphs, He affirms, regardless of what is happening in our life. God brings us to this new orientation, to this greater vision and deeper experience of our relationship with Him, the world, the community. So I hope these things might be helpful to you as you engage the Psalms. And it is my prayer that as you encounter them, that you will be able to experience in ways that your life craves for, that all of us crave for, the encounter with God, that we will be able to offer these Psalms up, know that God hears them, He responds to us, He moves in us, He moves among us, and these Psalms can become very powerful ways that God changes us, reveals Himself to us, and grows us more so into what He has created and designed for us to be.